Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Kristian Debus, Chief Commercial Officer at Virtonomy. Kristian Debus has been instrumental in pioneering and advancing the use of in silico clinical trials, computational modeling, and digital twin technology for medical devices within the digital health and MedTech space. At Virtonomy, Debus leads the company's U.S. operations and helps shorten the time to market for medical products, enabling medical product developers to test and validate devices virtually with simulated patient data, utilizing vast databases that reflect anatomical variability and pathological conditions, which accelerates product development and reduces regulatory risks. He also co-founded InfiniVida Ventures, where he advises health tech startups on strategy, regulatory, and commercialization challenges. Debus's prior work includes leadership roles at Thornton Tomasetti and Siemens, advancing the adoption of multiphysics simulation and data-driven innovation in life sciences. His expertise and influence as a member of global expert panels and industry organizations have helped bridge clinical, engineering, and regulatory needs, pushing the boundaries of digital transformation in global healthcare. In this conversation, we discuss his journey from aerospace engineering to medical device innovation at Virtonomy, and he emphasizes the importance of in silico trials and revolutionizing medical device development, the integration of AI in healthcare, and the future of digital hospitals. Kristian shares personal motivations stemming from his father's health challenges and highlights the need for patient empowerment through data access. He also addresses the regulatory hurdles in healthcare innovation and the role of startups in driving change. The conversation concludes with insights on the potential impact of quantum computing and the importance of collaboration in the healthcare sector. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you the conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions, the real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry-leading healthcare founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the strategies that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the minds shaping the industry. Now let's have Kristian tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Kristian, to the K in Clarity podcast. For the people listening, can you give a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, hi Mezue, hi everybody. Thanks for the invite and the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I'm Kristian Debus. I work for Virtonomy, a German startup company, where we focus on in silico clinical trials for mostly cardiovascular implant devices, heart valves, blood pumps, stent grafts, things like that. Yeah, I bring a German accent, but was born in the US and live in the US in California and lived there for 28 years, but I did grow up in Munich, so that brings me back to the German company.
Beautiful, very diverse. So excited to have this conversation. For us, usually the way we like to start things, as you may know, is that we typically like to do an icebreaker. Okay. And so with the icebreaker, my first question for you is, if you had to do a hackathon, then you had to have different individuals involved, let's say from medicine, tech, engineering, anywhere else. What challenge would they really be solving, and why would they be solving that problem? And how can that maybe interplay into the real world?
Yeah, so if I had everything I wished for, so I mentioned we work in silico, so it's basically we run computer models based on anatomical models, like a heart, or sections of the heart, or other body parts at that point, so maybe going to neurovascular. So that's where I'm coming from, these computer models and how they can help in real life. So my dream someday would be to have like a digitally enabled or driven hospital system, or a hospital at least, to demonstrate how these tools can be integrated and make the whole healthcare process and from a hospital to even rehabilitation more effective. more effective and more efficient, and reduce the cost and the waste that goes on right now. It's really challenging to be sick, especially in the United States. Other countries struggle too. People get older, everything gets more expensive. So how can we optimize that? I think we're in a good time for that. But if I had that, I would take the engineers, the physicians, put them all together, the MBAs, make sure we get the bookkeeping right and the numbers right, and build a first off digitally driven hospital. And there's actually efforts out there. People are doing that, they're working on that. Some large investors are putting money into that. So I don't think I'm completely off with that vision or that dream. So I think it's coming.
Going from there, I know that, your first experience really started in aerospace engineering before, shifting into healthcare. What about, that engineering perspective, really helped shift the way you think about things in your work today?
Yeah. I studied mechanical engineering because I like math and physics and I like motorcycles. But then I learned that there's other areas that might be even more interesting. And the thought process, so is like still always coming from understanding basic physics and the underlying mechanisms. And I think that's very useful in the medical device design space as well as even in the healthcare system altogether, diagnostics being very systematic and scientific about it. So I think that translates easily over, and it's kind of the same approach. What healthcare adds to it, that you interact with humans, so physicians, doctors, patients. So that adds, not we have aerospace also has humans to interact with, but at a different level. It's more personal in healthcare, which excites me. But the access or the approach I take is very similar and kind of coming from a analysis perspective and trying to understanding what the underlying mechanisms are, and always starting from simple models to understand what's happening to help in the real world then with that. So maybe German engineering geek kind of approach.
Yeah, I know when we spoke earlier too, you talked about the experience of your dad's heart attack and how that was a pivotal moment for you. Can you speak on that as well, and how it's impacted your work in med
Yeah,
device and healthcare?
thinking about that recently after we talked about it. And when he passed away I was 18, and I think he had probably, it was 1985, so we didn't really know, probably either an aortic aneurysm or aortic dissection, so it went really quick. And at the time I thought, well, I'm kind of scared of surgery and those sort of things, and I have shaky hands. It's like, I'll become an engineer, I like the math. But then after my master thesis, getting into my PhD, I realized there might actually be a use of these technologies for medical field. I don't have to become a doctor. I could be an engineer to help, right? And medical devices. And that really, when I was doing my postdoc, I worked on the blood flow through the aortic arch. I was really close to what I think happened to him, right? To analyze and understand that. And that started to open the light. Like, I can, as an engineer or as a scientist, I can contribute in my way to help make things better. And since then, I've been always trying to get into the medical field, but I had worked in different engineering fields, just, where modeling and simulation was more common. But then I was very excited to then move into medical devices, healthcare, life sciences, when I'd say the adoption rate just really went up in the industry in general. So very happy to be there now. It's a very motivating field too. Every morning you don't need to wonder why you're doing that, because eventually at the end of the day you just try to help patients to get healthier sooner or stay out of the hospital. That's the end goal, and accelerate the rehabilitation, things like that.
Why do you think, engineering is such a unique thing that can be applied to healthcare and, all its aspects and facilities?
Well, I guess that's an interesting one. When engineering in general has changed the world, like the last 150 years, or maybe even more than that, since inventing the wheel. So it's just another area of application that engineers are changing how we cure disease, or we help people under, in tough situations. So I think it's a very natural thing that engineering gets applied everywhere, like other things too. Like, it's not just engineering, there's the math, the science, there's everything else. And of course the hands-on people who really kind of change lives every day. As an engineer, I can't do that. As I said, I have the shaky hands. So I'm going to have to do my part of it.
I know with, your experience, you've, worked on med device and the technical aspects as well as, bridging some of the parts of actually writing submissions to the FDA. What have you kind of learned of, putting those two worlds together, and maybe what other leaders can take from that?
Yeah, well, that's maybe the medical field is a little different or more special, with collaboration or teaming up with the regulatories, with the medical device makers, with the physicians, the end users, the patients. There's a lot of, I would say, different interests involved. So you want to make everybody happy. You need the regulatories to make sure the device you develop doesn't kill the patient. do no harm first, right? You need the patient's input, you need the physician's input or the experts on how the devices work. So there's a lot of stakeholders at play. Not that other industries wouldn't have that either, aerospace, a lot of regulatory, automotive, and so forth, but it's a little bit more of an engineering controlled environment where I think medical devices, healthcare in general, it's in a different way more diverse. If you put an airplane in the air, you got air around it, so you got to deal with the air. That's the environment. If you put a medical device and stick it into somebody's body, push a catheter up an artery, there's a lot of tissue differences in there. There's a lot of differences in the environment that you have to explore. So from the engineering side, that's a different challenge, but then you have to translate that into minimizing risk, optimizing efficacy, be efficient and so forth. It has its own challenges for sure.
At your company, you guys really help with in silico trials, right? And also how, you're working with different individuals to do virtual patient simulations. Can you kind of explain maybe with some examples of, how these tools actually help reduce, time to market, the safety trials and also, patient safety?
Yeah, that could be now a very long story, so I'm trying to make it short and concise as far as I can. So what we have at Virtonomy is a cloud platform where we offer several thousand data sets, CT, MRI scan database that we then convert into three-dimensional geometry where we can implant the device. Then based on the patient data, we can also create virtual patients or computational model-based patients, mathematically described, that you can really then look at a large distribution on pathologies, sex differences, location differences, regional age differences, of course, and you can do all kind of analysis on the anatomies. So when you first come up with the idea, I want to make a medical device, I can look at all these anatomies and say, how would it fit in there? I could make a fitting analysis. How does the device fit into the chest? If I remove a heart, for example, right? If you make a completely artificial heart, things like that. And at the next level, then we run simulations, physics-based simulations. So we can see, is there recirculation behind a device that I put into the bloodstream that will then cause thrombosis or plaque buildup, things like that. Is a stent basically exposed to bending and strains and stresses that over time would lead to failure, breaking the stent or just other effects. So we can do that all in the simulation on these hundreds of patients or thousands of patients as needed. And with that, we create digital evidence that can be then used for regulatory approval process along with benchtop tests, animal tests, and human tests. So first you start out basically with supplementing that information. But as we progress with the technology, can really, in many cases, let's say you have a benchtop test and you use that to validate your simulation, you can then run less and less of the benchtop tests because the simulation is now trusted and proven out, validated, verified, that you can do all kind of variations on materials and designs of the device. So you need less of the benchtop, which is quite expensive at times, right? So you can do that on a computer. The next step is, can I support animal trials or ideally reduce or ideally get rid of animal trials? Because, that's the first step. Once people are happy with the design, they're going to put it into a pig or into a dog and want to see how it performs in there. But often the stretch from an animal to a human is very large. I mean, the access routes are different. The anatomy is different, a lot of differences. Disease states are very different. Like look at an aneurysm, a bulging blood vessel. In animals, you don't really find them easily, so you have to induce them, and that's not the same as aneurysm that develops over 50, 60 years in a human, right? So if we can bridge that gap and reduce animal trials as much as possible, maybe still use them as validation cases, and then jump to the human trial, that's a big gain. Also ethically, you want to reduce the animal trials as much as you can, and we really hope that we can help minimize them and hopefully completely get rid of them eventually. And then the last step is then really supporting the actual clinical trials on humans. So one part would be, before you put a device into a human, can you take a scan and put it in computationally so it doesn't harm the patient in the clinical trial? But then also the main goal would really be to say, can we bring it down from, let's say you need 500 patients signed up. It takes you 5-7 years to do this clinical trial or something, right? Let's say we can run 1,000 patients virtually, 2,000 patients, and then get away with 300, 200 patients instead of 500. Now we're bringing down the time to market, which means we help patients sooner. Let's say we can get this clinical trial done in 3 years instead of 5, because now we don't need as many patients. The patients are safer. So that's a lot of money in the bank, and it's a lot of patients being helped much sooner. And of course, the clinical trials are expensive too, and these 200 patients cost you money. If you can do it computationally, well, we are not for free either, but it's definitely more cost effective on that level. So that's the big picture. And I don't think in my life we'll completely see the getting rid of human trials. It's just not going to happen. There's a lot of things in computational modeling that are not that easy to predict, like long-term behavior or like side effects and things like that. But if we can reduce the number of patients in the trial and accelerate the time to market, the benefits will be huge for the whole economy too. I mean, in the medical devices design world, devices are expensive to take a long time. We all know how it is these days. You go to a doctor and you deal with your insurance. You want the most effective, most efficient, and lowest risk device on the market as soon as you can. So that was a mouthful. I warned you about.
It's good and it's very in depth. From my own thoughts, it seems like a very pioneering technology and way to do things. And so why is this not known about more? And, what potential does it really have for the future? I know you spoke on some things, but.
I mean, I think we work hard on it to make it more known out there in the world. And I joined that field in 2012 when I was working business development for using computational modeling, fluid dynamics for medical devices, and joined the ASME WinV40. So ASME is the American Society of Mechanical Engineering. And we're working on the verification and validation standard on how to use these simulation technologies for regulatory processes, approval and evidence generation. And I think a lot has happened in those 13 years now. I mean, the ASME started before I joined, of course, I think 2009 or 10. And it's been actually very, very progressive compared to other industries, pretty fast to get the standard out, which I think was 2016. Included the FDA as team members. Even the FDA was driving it for a while. And so the regulators were really working very closely with industry, with academia as well. And there's also then initiatives in Europe that were driving the same direction. Very strong, Avicenna Alliance and others, MDIC. So I think we've done a lot to really, make it not just known, but also create the evidence that it works. A lot of use cases being generated, a lot of case studies, worked with industry, with academia to go into extreme cases, but also the most obvious ones. So I think it's a pretty good, large, I would say, group of people now who are fully into that. But, it's still not mainstream in many areas, but I think the last 2-3 years we've seen a lot of change actually. So my personal experience going to conferences where, you would tell the basics and what we kind of do with some images and some animations and movies. And just a couple of years later, I would say the last 5 years were really after COVID started to really change that because people are looking at new technologies. But today I go to a conference, it's like, oh yeah, you're doing this in Silico stuff. This is really cool. How can we get into that? So the tone has changed, the understanding has changed, and podcasts like this help. So thank you for that.
I guess you're welcome. Yeah. I know also what you're speaking about here. It's other future technologies. And I know in your icebreaker, you had mentioned digital first hospitals. And so I wanted to dive a bit more into that of what do you think that's really going to look like and how close are we to that reality? You mentioned some people are developing that, but could you go a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, so I think why it might be interesting now, the digital hospital idea become more of a reality is that a lot of other technologies have advanced too. Like everybody talks about AI and digital twins all day long, especially AI or even quantum computing, whatnot. But I think that's really way out there. But just the computational resources, the way we can deal with data using AI is like a data management engine almost. It really allows us to integrate our technology as well as others. Bringing real world data into an environment like a hospital is now feasible, which it wasn't many years ago. The computational resources were not there, the expertise wasn't there. Now everybody knows how to use AI, most of it. It's a lot more larger workforce out there to implement those things. So in our case, we don't talk much about AI because we use it as a tool. Like to get the images from a scan into our 3D environment, we use a lot of AI for that. We can use AI to accelerate the simulations that we're doing. Because these simulations can take a couple days, sometimes just a couple of hours, but depending on the complexity. But if you do a heart valve model, it can take a while, but AI can help us with that too, accelerate that. So it's really the technology is now there to enable that, and also the communication platforms within the hospital system. I think they're opening up. Electronic healthcare record access is more feasible using more modern tools. So I think that the time is ripe. I was always intrigued by this TV show, Pure Genius, I think it was called, like 2016. It only made it one season because it was too geeky, and it was kind of out there with like the things that are possible technically, so kind of science fiction. But it was basically a digital hospital in that sense that I want to see it, that you get in, you get diagnosed with all the latest, greatest tools, but also then integrated with the physicians, with their expert that you need, right, to make the call, what's really happening here, but really have all the technology at hand to do the best for the patient. And that kind of always stuck in my head. So, and I think 2016 was a little early, but I mean, you've seen what's happening with just AI the last couple of years, or the computational tools are out there with the GPUs from NVIDIA being really accelerating everything that we do every day. It's exciting. Quantum computing is not so much my thing. I still don't quite understand how it works, but I think that eventually that will come too, and then really blow the lid off everything we do. When that happens.
Absolutely. Those are technologies that, quantum, it's also something I'm looking into. So I think I understand there's a lot of future in reality. And I think from what you'd mentioned there, Silicon Valley is, a breeding ground for innovation. But I know we had discussed as well, that, healthcare is something that's very complex, and maybe it's not always the best training ground. And so I think, what have you maybe learned from discrepancies between, what's going on in the Valley and maybe healthcare innovation in other regions like, Europe or the Middle East? And maybe what can people learn from there?
That's a good question. I was just at a mixer in, where was it? Menlo Park last week. A lot of venture capitalists and others all coming together. And yeah, the Valley is still very special with its energy, and how people come up just with new ideas and raise $100 million right away. I believe in healthcare, life science, and medical device. It's usually you don't get that hockey stick right away. When the money comes quickly, so you don't sell to the masses. It's business to business sales. And also, regulatory approval and all that takes time. So I see that the European market is maybe pretty interesting to look at these days. Obviously, we are for a German company, and it lends itself maybe also to apply the technology in a smaller market right away. We talk about, let's say, a hospital environment. The regulations are a little more compact, I think, in smaller countries. US is probably the messiest healthcare system out there because it's so complex and big, and it's an open market. It's different than government-driven healthcare systems. They all have their pros and cons, but it's certainly not without its challenging to just work your way through reimbursement and whatnot. And for the medical device makers, I mean, that the main market is in the US for sure, still, and will be for quite some time. But we see other markets rising strongly, China, India, Europe, of course, as well. And then you mentioned Middle East. I think they have a great opportunity advantage there to leapfrog some of the hurdles that we had, because for a while, it seems like they're behind with MedTech and things like that. But now they're really implementing latest and greatest. I think we had some conversations with Abu Dhabi recently, and the hospital systems they put together also in Saudi Arabia are just amazing. So patients are flying there now to have surgery because it's probably cheaper than the US. They really have the high tech integrated and enabled. And so that's a technology that's really great, because now you can leap a lot of the slowdowns that you have because you have to overcome existing systems because they're implementing a new system. So that's quite exciting. And on the investor side, I must say that I think Europe really is trying to catch up with the Valley or with the US. So we've had some very interesting conversations, great conversations with very progressive thinkers in Europe. And I think they need to, because they were behind for quite some time. But I think that environment is changing and it's becoming more open-minded. But that's just my personal view. I mean, people might think completely different, but that's what I see.
Yeah.
Like
No,
all
that
of what
makes
I'm saying here, obviously.
Yeah. I know you had mentioned that sometimes many other healthcare organizations are late to adopt some innovation. Obviously, I know it comes down to regulatory means, but why else do you think this is? And, what innovation mindset can you maybe talk to leaders about that they can potentially adopt to bring to their organizations?
So when I worked at Siemens, I think one of our slogans always, if you don't innovate, you die. That is true for any industry. In every case, you have to keep innovating, right? And it's very hard for large organizations to do that because usually they have the cash cows or processes that are in place. And I think that the healthcare processes, which also then influence the medical device makers, due to the regulatory side, but also the minimizing the risk and all these things involved and the complexity of the challenges you're dealing with, right? They're very complex. If you build an airplane, it flies through the air. An airplane is an airplane is an airplane. A car is a car is a car. It drives over asphalt, it rains, it needs to cover those things. The human body is incredibly complex, right? I mean, you have a runny nose, next guy has a ear infection, next one has an aneurysm, next one needs a new knee. So it's really a complex environment, and to cover all of that in a system that is not really laid out for profit, I think that's part of the problem why innovation doesn't happen as fast as it probably could. Because you really make sure that, back to what I said at the beginning, whatever you build first, make sure it doesn't kill the patient. It's not great if you put a valve in somebody and it works wonderfully, but the patient didn't survive the surgery or something like that, right? So there's a lot of different requirements, and for a good reason, that will slow down the innovation. But that's a challenge to the leaders to overcome that and really start to think, what's ahead beyond the quarter that I had to bring my numbers in, like what's happening in 4 or 5 years. And one of the trends that I find extremely exciting, there's not that much talk about it recently, but it's value-based care, where you, instead of just paying for every procedure, you're really looking at the outcome, right? How can I keep the patient from coming back into the hospital? For me, one thing in the US system, which I find brutal, is you get a surgery and they send you up the day after or the morning after or something like that, right? So, in some cases it's good, but mostly it's about cost. Right? And I grew up in Germany, in Europe, so I mean, you stay in the hospital 3-4 days because it's a different payer system. And at the end of the day, if that patient doesn't come back, that saves me money, right? I really want to get that person home and stay home and don't come back. But that never really happened in the US, so there's a lot that can be done there. And I think that trend to value-based care, so you see what's the value I'm contributing for the big picture of things, right? And there's many little implementations, and there's, it also has to do with the regulatories, but I think that's an exciting direction that we have to change to some degree. And that's also where in Silico and this digital means and technologies can be really, really helpful, because you want to predict the outcome before you do anything, right? You want to see where this procedure or process with my patient will lead to. And then computational models can really help a lot with that. So I'm excited about that trend to continue and really take more leaps and move forward.
I know you've worked, with startups and, large organizations alike. And so maybe what are some of the most promising or, innovations that you're seeing, and, where are they coming from? Is it, inside or outside, traditional healthcare organizations?
Well, I've seen innovation everywhere. I mean, that's what we work with right on our client side. And in MedDev, it's very common, many device makers would look at startup companies to kind of outsource the risk and then acquire them, right? So they come up with a new stent graft or something like that. So innovation very often doesn't happen in the big companies as much, because they have a lot of products that they keep maintaining and upgrading, still innovating in a more incremental approach. So improving the devices that they have, which is a lot of work and challenging, and making sure that works properly. But often leapfrog technologies are more outsourced to the outside. So I see in startups that do more the crazy stuff. That's what the startups are for, right? So, it's a good test bed to try out new things. So I hope to see more of that in the future, that those large vendors really work closer with the startups, because they can enable and support that, and they have all the data that the startups would need to work on that. So I've seen some models where that works pretty well. Not necessarily like a lean startup, but more like an investment from a large one into a startup, because it's not just money, it's also the expertise that comes with it, right? So sometimes you don't want to be biased with too much knowledge when you start a new device and do that, but at the end of the day, you need to know when you run the wrong direction. So I think that could be more synergistic efforts and work that could be done there. Otherwise, where I expect new things to come out, I think that today they can come from anywhere. Today, anywhere in the world, you can sit down and have a concept and develop it. The technology is there. Still, you need the environment to foster your innovation. So I think the US is still a very strong area for that, even though a lot of Californians are apparently moving to Texas. but the mindset is still there. But if you talk about specific, maybe medical device domains, I mean, there's a lot happening in heart valves, but I think the classic applications, stent valves, stent grafts, diverter stents in neurovascular and so forth, that there's still a lot of space to further improve them. There's, on the digital twin side, we also are looking into moving into some pharma applications now. So a little away from the medical devices side, because it's all kind of interconnected. So there's drug delivery devices. How does the drug even get to the anatomy where you need it, to the place where it needs to act, things like that, or interaction with drugs, organs, things like that. That might be needed for a specific device to function properly, whatnot. There's a lot of great things I can think of that can be done. I wouldn't bet on one specific application that's going to change the world. I mean, of course, there's a lot of work in the neuro field, with brain interfaces and so forth, but that's something that we have not looked into too much, but it's also kind of controversial. So I think there's things to be expected. On the orthopedic side, we've also looked a little bit into it, but that seems to be already very progressed for surgery. Where I believe actually I'm contradicting myself. I think the biggest breakthrough in the next few years is going to be robotics. Robotic surgery and computational models there can be very, very powerful and useful, especially with accelerating on the computational side. GPUs coming out, and NVIDIA is very engaged now with robotics surgery and simulation, and we are looking into that as well with some clients. That's certainly going to come pretty strongly, I think.
With everything that you noted, I think, there seems kind of like there's a convergence. So how do you think that's all going to come together with AI, simulations and digital transformation in healthcare?
How is it going to come together? I don't know, we're all just plugging away every day until the right people meet the right people and keep evolving the technology and the collaborations. So, I mean, yes, of course, there could be like a unicorn thing that says builds one of these digital hospitals. And I know there's some efforts out there, people doing that. But to really change the whole healthcare system platform, we just have to work with everybody in the community to make that happen and support different initiatives. A friend of mine started a rehabilitation center now. Second one, actually, one in the US now, first one's in Belgium, where they look at rehabilitation of people with lung disease, and then doing digital twin technology to see how they improve over time. So those are steps in the right direction. They're very exciting. And I think we have to latch on to all those steps in the processes that a patient goes through to make these improvements. It goes from imaging to implant design to implant surgical planning, for example, something we work on as well. Say, you get a heart valve tomorrow or full heart replacement. We would look at the scan before the operation, see how the device fits in. Then it gets put in. We look at the scan data sets afterwards. Was it successful? What can we learn for the next generation? That's really that digital twin loop that we want to be in. And so these efforts are ongoing everywhere in different fields, and they just all have to come together. Yeah, so if you can get me a couple $100 million, I'll be happy to start the clinical environment together with Virtonomy.
Yeah,
Send a check.
That would be interesting. I know you also had mentioned the future technology like quantum computing. I wanted you to maybe speak up more on that for the audience, and how do you think that would tie together with advanced simulation for modeling, device design, and patient care?
Yeah, so as I said, I really don't fully understand quantum computing. It took me years to understand how bits and bytes work, and that's a whole nother beast. So I've seen that some people are using it for kind of simulations, but the acceleration is not huge yet because the algorithms and compilers and stuff are just not there. But also certain technologies lend themselves more to quantum computing than others, and I think it's going to be very useful for AI type of work. But for the physics-based simulation that we do, it's probably be some other day, later in time, when more complex system can be deployed. So I don't know when that happens, how that happens, but I think we all need to have an eye on it. It's going to be a big breakthrough. And specifically for us, as we need to solve this physics equation, as we deploy AI more and more to solve these equations, maybe then the quantum computing can also help us to get there faster. And the evolution on the AI side is being so rapidly that I don't want to say, oh, quantum computing is 20 years out, 50 years out. Maybe it's only 5 years. I have no idea. So maybe it's like the fusion problem. We're always like 10 years away from it. I don't know. So, but it's exciting. Keep an eye on it. I wouldn't buy all the stock that are out there, but totally kind of beyond my horizon there. And of course, it brings its own risks and dangers. Other people know much more about that, so I'll stay away from it.
Yeah. Switching gears too, I know we had just talked about, dealing with patients, and I know you said you're passionate about, empowering patients, to have access to their own data, and also to better education. How can that actually become a reality? And, how can we also make sure that, doctors are also having, data-driven conversations with patients?
Yeah, I guess that also goes back to this digital hospital idea that, of course, you have to be as transparent as you can to the patient and educate the patient more. So I think, again, these digital tools can be very useful there, right? I mean, if you have your iPhone here or whatever, Samsung, sorry, I don't want to promote everybody here, but you get all your digital data on the device. Your Apple Watch tells you what your heartbeat looks like, and if you have atrial fibrillation or something. So people already are much more educated and smart about their health if they want to than like 20, 15 years ago, 10 years ago even. I think there's still a lot more that can be done. Like imagine you go to the doctor and say, hey, I've heard I need a new heart valve. What does my heart valve look like? Can I have, instead of getting a DICOM, well, it's the format that you see those grayscale pictures, like an X-ray. It's like, well, that looks great, but I don't recognize anything. There's something is gray and something is black. Am I dead? Am I alive? So if, let's say, we have a 3D rendering for everybody immediately available, and then you compare yourself with other patient data sets, and the physician can explain to you more clearly why you need the specific device and how it changes, I think everybody would be more comfortable. And I think it's really in the hand of the patient to educate them more and more, right? I mean, not everybody, most people I know, they go to ChatGPT before they go to the doctor and analyze, so they have a more concise or precise question to the doctor. And that could be dangerous because now they're starting to self-analyze and don't really understand everything. And I think the doctors need to adjust to that too, because there is more and more information out there, and they have to make sure it's the right one, that the sources are checked. But apparently, ChatGPT is passing all the tests to be a kind of good supporter for a doctor, a physician. So yeah, we just need to go with the times and see where that's going to be. And I think educating the patient more and more and give him access with transparency is a great thing. Another friend of mine, he basically, if you have image data, and usually you go to the doctor, want those data, they give you a DVD or a CD. And then you go home and you don't have, maybe in your car there's still a CD player, but no computer has a CD player. What do you do with it? So that's really so behind the times. If you go to his company, you just sign up online and boom, then you got your image data on the screen, you can look at them. So I think that's the kind of progress we really need to have to educate the patient and the physician. They can have a different conversation with each other, right? Very elevated, right?
Absolutely. With, everything you mentioned and, in your work, how do you go about, fostering collaboration between engineers, clinicians, and regulatory bodies to really build out, amazing solutions?
How do we foster that? Well, be a part of these organizations, ASME, MDIC, and so forth. They kind of enable those sort of things. Or you just build your own network, right? Some people at UC San Francisco, at Stanford, Boston Children's Hospital, you build your reputation or your pedigree and work with those people. And yeah, it's just grinding work, working with them and understanding how they live, how they work. It's very challenging at times to get time with the physician because they're completely overloaded, overworked. So it's another thought, maybe we can help them. We have a bit more time to be creative again if some of the computer models can aid them to be more effective and efficient, right? Virtonomy started out in Europe, so there's a lot of good connections we have there with German and European hospitals. But it was kind of to really get the company going, you had to develop these relationships first. So you get image data, you get the perspective of the physicians and also the medical device companies, right? So you want to become like the in-between person who talks to everybody. But at the end of the day, there's no magic there. It's networking, business development, talking to people, going to events. But what we like to do, we go to a lot of events where the medical device makers show their new devices to physicians. So that's where we can meet all of them. There's usually the leadership of the medical device companies are there and the leading physicians in the world to show actually real-time surgery And that's where we want to be. That's where we go to really introduce our technology and also meet those people to communicate with all of them.
Before we go on to the lightning round, I think the last question I want to ask you, is, obviously in silico trials, I think can have a great potential for the future. And so I think, what do you want maybe the audience to understand a bit more about that, about its value and maybe the potential limitations as well, just so we could really drive that point home?
Yeah, I think we're just starting with in silico, really, even though we've been working on it for 10, 15 years. I think it can really change how we come up with new devices, but also new drugs. Silico is not just for medical devices, that's what we do, but there's companies who develop new drugs with that, test drugs for safety, efficacy, and whatnot, same on the devices side. So I think it's really going to change how we can, medical device companies and pharma companies can bring devices safer to market much faster, which at the end of the day really helps everybody, brings the costs down, and they're going to be on a longevity track. We want to live forever. That's great. The risk is that, the risk of not trusting the computer model is not that high. Most people blindly trust an experiment. That's also an old conundrum. If it's an experiment, if I can see it, I'll trust it. But that an experiment is a benchtop experiment, often very grossly simplifies certain assumptions, you got to see that too. Most people are very skeptical when they see computer models. It's maybe a healthy thing. So because you do need to do your due diligence, you need to do your verification, validation modeling to make sure that you really, create the quality and of work that is required. So I don't see too much risk there as long as the right people work on it. When you democratize something, it becomes available for everybody. There is a risk that people just start to because it becomes part of the routine to blindly use it. So maybe that's the risk, that we want to keep this critical thinking, skeptical thinking about the power of all these tools alive at all times, which is really critical thinking for everything you do. So don't trust one thing blindly because don't trust ChatGPT because it worked well for you yesterday, because it keeps learning and changing itself. Maybe tomorrow you still need to change the sources. And the same is for in silico. Make sure you dot your I's and cross the T's. Do your proper work. Quality is essential. I worked 2 years in software quality, and I thought it's really not my thing, but I learned how important it is to really check all the little things, because a small error can cause huge problems down the road, right? So just keep doing good engineering work, good physicians do your work, do your analysis, and patients educate yourself, and then we're on a good track. But critical thinking is, something that we always have to remind ourselves that we owe that to ourselves in our lives to do quality work. So maybe that's my slogan for the day. Keep the critical thinking going, or if you don't have it, work on it.
Okay, Kristian, it's time for the lightning round. Okay. So my first question for you is, what do you think is the biggest advantage for computational modeling in healthcare, maybe even in terms of, product development, if you had to put it?
The biggest advantage, I would say, it's the spectrum that it can cover in a very fast time if you have enough resources on it, maybe. Yeah. Let me add to that. It's also the upfront de-risking of, say, any innovation that you come up with before you start investing too much money into it. That's maybe the even bigger thing, that you say, before I start putting things into animals or build very expensive prototypes, I want to just simulate the heck out of it to make sure I don't build something that's never going to work. And that's general for all simulations, not just in silico.
My next question for you is, in one sentence, if you had to put it, what is the biggest barrier to digital transformation and innovation in healthcare organizations?
I think a big part is maybe that people are afraid of innovation in some sense, that they're afraid their job's going to go away. So instead of enhancing the work, so it's similar to what AI discussions are about. These in silico methods are also on that same level, where they say, okay, is it going to replace me? Is it going to make my life harder? Is it going to cause more work for me? Instead of seeing it as a positive, say, I'm going to be down the road, I might have a bit of a learning curve, but down the road I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to have a supporter on my side that is digital, that's going to help me make better products faster. So that mindset is still around there as well.
My last question for you is, what's one breakthrough that maybe people don't know about that you think will have an impact on medicine in the next few years, maybe even decade?
Breakthrough. Well, I think mostly, we talked about AI, quantum computing, but something that's actually really real and in our hands, other than the AI, is computational powers. I think that that will make real-time simulation eventually feasible, that you say, I'm going to stick this device into my body or this patient's body, and I can predict how it behaves and how it interacts and those things. It's still a bit out there, but with the acceleration of the compute power that's been happening due to AI and also computer gaming, I think that is really opens a whole new world. I mean, it's almost like, when I started with my first model, I think we ran on a 300 megahertz desktop simulation in the 90s. I mean, you don't even know what megahertz is anymore, right? Those really slow things. We didn't have multi-core computers even, and we're still able to run simulations. And today, I mean, my phone is so much faster than any of those computers I worked on back then. So if that acceleration keeps going, especially on the GPU front, that's going to be opening a lot of doors and opportunities there. So, and then a lot of it is used to be driven. Look at NVIDIA and their competitors by computer gaming, visualization, computer gaming, and all that stuff. I was never a gamer. I've wrote a few programs when I was young. I was a kid. As soon as I was written, I was done. I found it boring. But then to see how that whole market took off and what it is today, and how we as simulation guys really benefited from it is amazing. You just wait a few months and you got a computer that's like twice as fast. Maybe not.
Really cool.
Thanks to the gamers. They really helped us a lot.
Yeah. Well, Kristian, thank you for your time and your thoughts. I know we spoke on, a lot of things when it comes down to future technologies, computational measures, innovation, simulation. What are some final thoughts that you have for the audience?
Final thoughts. Well, thanks for listening first, and I hope it wasn't too geeky. Try to keep it real, and have an eye on the evolution of Silico and critical thinking. Keep critical thinking going, educate yourself, because these technologies seem to be very nerdy at some point, but they will become mainstream, part of our new lives, that we, everybody knows what a clinical trial is and animal trials are. The animal trials minimize that, and so we're here to change that. And with that, hopefully impacting the whole healthcare system. So it's better, because we're running out of money. We all want to get older, but that costs.
Yeah.
And thanks again also for the opportunity to have the conversation with you.
Of course. And thank you again for your time. Where can people, choose to connect with you if they choose to do so?
Easiest is to find me on LinkedIn, Kristian Debus, Kristin with a K. You'll probably post it on the YouTube if you put it there. LinkedIn is easy. Reach out to me. I'll be happy to connect. Or send me an email to kristiandebus@gmail.com.
Perfect. Well, Kristian, thank you again for your time on the K in Clarity podcast.
And keep up the good work with K in Clarity.
Thank you. All right.
Cheers.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.